This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. This episode is sponsored by C-School, the online school for creativity training. If you'd like to unleash your creative potential and access a free Creativity Blueprint training series, then just head over to c.school. That's www.c.school for your free training series. In today's episode, I speak with Grant Baldwin of the Speaker Lab, and we talk about the biggest challenges for speakers today, the best way of determining what you should speak about, and how to find your ideal audience. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Grant Baldwin. Grant Baldwin is a speaker, podcaster, author, entrepreneur, and all-around normal dude trying to make a little dent in the world. Since becoming a professional speaker 10 years ago, he has now given over 400 keynotes to audiences as large as 13,000. Today, Grant speaks on a variety of topics, including motivation, leadership, and entrepreneurship, as well as training other speakers through the Speaker Lab training programs and podcasts. It's my great pleasure to have Grant join us today. So welcome, Grant.
Thanks, James. Appreciate you letting me hang out with you.
So it's great. So share with everyone what's going on in your world just now.
Man, life is good. We actually, like on a little side personal note, we just moved into a new house. We've been building a new house for the past year or so, and so just moved in there, and so finally we've been unsettled for a little while this process has been going on. So now that we're in and boxes are unpacked and things are put away, then we all the family feels good now. So we're enjoying that.
So when did this life of being a speaker, when did it all start for you?
Yeah, so I've been in the professional speaking world for a little over 10 years now. And so long story short, I actually, in college, I worked for a guy who was a full-time speaker and kind of worked on the backside of the business and helping with logistics and booking and contracts and travel and all that stuff. And just kind of got to see like, okay, this is a thing. Like I think for a lot of people who are interested in speaking, like we didn't really realize like this is a career option or something that you could do. You just, you see some speakers maybe in high school or someone that passed through town or whatever, and you just thought it was like a random one-off thing that they did and didn't really know like this is a possibility. So working for him kind of got to help me see the ins and outs of the business side of it and just kind of learn a little bit about it. And then in college, I actually went to college to be a youth pastor. And so did that at a local church for a little while. And parts of it I liked, parts of it I didn't like. But it gave me a lot of opportunities to speak. And speaking was one of those things that I always naturally felt fairly good at, and also one of those things I really genuinely enjoyed and wanted to do more of. And so after I left that position that I was in, then met a couple guys who were full-time speakers and kind of learned more about the business and learned what was working for them, and slowly built up the business and did that for the next 8-9 years or so, speaking full-time, anywhere from 60 to 70 events all over, primarily in the U.S. And then slowly I was having a lot of people asking me, hey, I want to do that. I want to be a speaker. How would I go about doing that? And so then we started running some different online training programs and our podcast called the Speaker Lab, where we teach people about the ins and outs of the business of speaking and how to find and book speaking engagements and speaking fees and what do you speak about and all of that stuff that I'm sure we'll get into. So that's kind of been the evolution of the business. And
when you got into speaking, I mean, it's such a huge area, professional speaking. Did you know right from the start the topic, what you actually wanted to speak about? And was it then just a case of figuring out how best to craft that speech and promote yourself and sell your speaking? Or did it take you a while to find your thing, find your lane?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So one of the things that helped me was as a former youth pastor, I was doing a lot of work with high school students. And so that was kind of where I wanted to stay. So at least from that standpoint, I knew who I wanted to speak to. And I think that's a great point for anybody who's interested in speaking is oftentimes there's really two sides of the equation. There's who you speak to, and then what's the problem that you solve, or what is it that you speak about for that audience. And most people are somewhat clear on one side or the other, but they're maybe confused on the opposite side. So in my case, I felt pretty clear on who it was that I wanted to speak to, but I wasn't really sure, like, what do you speak about? Like, what are the options? And there's always kind of a balance between what I want to speak about or what a speaker wants to speak about versus what are people actually hiring speakers to talk about? Because just because you want to talk about it doesn't necessarily mean that anybody cares or that anybody cares enough to pay for that as a viable topic. And so part of it was me just kind of doing some homework and research, just trying to figure out, okay, other people who are speaking to, high school students or speaking to college students or speaking in the education market, what is it that they are speaking on? What are the common topics? What are the, common trends there? Just trying to learn like what's available, what's happening out there. And one way to think about this is again, look for other speakers who are doing something similar that you want to do and doing it in a way that you want to do it. And what I mean by that is, let's say that I was like, okay, I know I want to speak to students and I'm really passionate about gardening. All right. So I want to speak to high school students about gardening. And I start looking around and the landscape of other speakers. And I say, okay, I see all these other speakers that speak to students, but I don't see anybody speaking about gardening. All right. This is perfect. I'm going to be the first. Okay. That's not a good thing. All right. Because if someone's not speaking about it, about that topic or to a specific audience, there's probably a reason why. So really what you want to do is you want to find other speakers who are speaking on a similar topic and who are speaking to the type of audience that you want to speak to, because it kind of proves that there is some type of market there. And so in my case, I knew several speakers who were speaking to students, and it was just kind of a matter of figuring out, all right, what is it that they're kind of talking about? What are the core ideas and topics, and how does that blend with what I'm interested in or would want to talk about? And so that's kind of how that evolution took place.
Now, with the Speaker Labs, through the podcast and the training, because you're dealing with so many different speakers every day, I'm wondering, as you mentioned that, one challenges could be, what am I going to be speaking about? That's one. But what are some of the big challenges that speakers, especially if they're coming in, maybe they haven't even done any kind of maybe public talks, never mind paid talks. What are the big, concerns, the big questions that they have?
Yeah, the two big things that I think are hugely pivotal for speakers to really figure out, and these are the things that no matter what stage of business a speaker's in, if someone's been doing, they've never done a gig before, or someone who's been doing a lot of gigs and are just trying to figure out how to get more traction or book more gigs or how to charge more, the thing that oftentimes really comes back to is those two key questions of who do you speak to and what's the problem that you solve for that audience. And so what happens with most people is maybe, for example, you've done a few speaking gigs here and there and you just really, really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. You got good feedback. You enjoyed the time being on stage. You want to do more of it. And it's just something that it's exhilarating. It's exciting. You want to do more of it, but you have no idea where to begin. And so for you, all you know is you like speaking. And so if someone were to ask you, hey, what do you speak about? And our response is going to be like, what do you want me to speak about? I can speak about anything because I just like to speak. But I mean, obviously from a business perspective, that's a horrible way to approach it. Saying that you can speak on anything, or what do you want me to speak on? I can talk about anything and everything. Like that's just a horrible business idea. And it's no different in speaking as it is in anything else. If you say, I'm a coach. Oh, that's interesting. What do you coach on? What do you want me to coach on? I can coach on business and life and relationships and marriage and parenting. It's like, nah, you can't do that. So being really, really clear about who it is that you speak to, and then again, what that problem is that you solve. And even though it feels counterintuitive, because we want to spread our net as far and wide as possible. We want to say, I speak to anybody about anything, because that gives me hypothetically the most potential opportunities to do the thing I want to do, which is speaking. But really, when you do that, it really hurts you in a negative way, versus if you really narrow it down and focus and say, this is the lane that I'm going to focus on, and this is the people that I'm going to speak to, and this is the problem that I'm going to solve for them. It makes a huge, huge difference. So I'll give you an example. So there's a gal that's going through has gone through one of our training programs, and she is in the veterinary industry. All right, she's a veterinarian, works with animals, and so she was telling me recently about a friend of hers who does some speaking in the social media space, right? Social media marketing, right? And so social media marketing is really hypothetically the type of topic that could appeal to any type of business. Any type of small or large business is probably going to be interested in some type of marketing, specifically like social media marketing. But what they decided to do was to really niche down and focus on all they're going to do is teach and speak on social media marketing specifically for veterinarians, right? And so by doing so, all of a sudden they become that go-to person. So whenever they go are speaking somewhere, and someone's at that event, and they are looking for someone who can help with some type of social media marketing for other veterinarians, whether that be in a consulting role or a coaching role or something like that, or maybe some type of agency and implementation, service that they provide. That becomes the go-to person versus a social media marketing person that's just kind of generic and can speak to a bunch of different industries. And so it becomes much easier to really become the go-to person on a specific topic and for a specific specific vertical or niche when you position yourself accordingly versus just trying to say, well, I speak on social media marketing and I speak on customer service and I speak on sales and I speak on leadership and I speak on change and I speak to anybody and everybody about all of those topics, in which case you just kind of get lost in the sea of everybody else who's trying to do the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm also guessing that's one reason to do that is because you have a limited marketing resources, limited time, limited marketing resources, and it's a market entry question. I could go for all these different audiences, but I need to narrow that focus in order to make the best use of the assets that I have and the time that I have available. But that doesn't necessarily mean, so you could go into, let's say, social media for the veterinary because you know that they have a real challenge, about using social media. You could really become the dominant person in that place, but that doesn't necessarily mean that after a while you can't maybe open it out. Like maybe you go to doctors or you go to in the agricultural, market, people that make great food products, for example. You can gradually expand it out from your circle of competence.
Yeah, exactly. Two thoughts on that. One is, I'll give you another quick example. So there's a buddy of mine that I was interviewing on our podcast, the Speaker Lab podcast, and he was saying before he got into speaking, he was involved in real estate investing, and was basically he and a buddy ran a company for basically high net worth individuals who wanted to invest in real estate but had no idea what to do. And so he said they were doing this for a little while, business was fine, and then they made one little change and it changed everything. And the change was, instead of just focusing on high net worth individuals, and there's a lot of people that would fall under that category, that they started focusing just on dentists. That was it. The only change that they made was we were just going to focus on dentists. So they were going to dentist conferences and conventions, and they're connecting with dentists who are wanting to invest in in real estate in some form. And so he said, what happens is all of a sudden you become much more referable because someone would say, hey, I have this dentist friend who you got to talk to them. They need what you have. But the other thing is, by just focusing on dentists, it starts to open up into other verticals, meaning that a dentist would be connecting with them and say, hey, I have a friend that you need to talk to. I have a doctor friend that you need to talk to. I have a such and such a friend that you need to talk to that would be great for this. Can you talk to them? Absolutely, right? In the same way that, let's say that this, going back to the example earlier of the social media marketing person who speaks to veterinarians, let's say she's speaking to veterinarians, and some veterinarian comes up and says, you know what, this was really, really good. I have a friend who's a realtor and they really would benefit from this. Can you speak to them? Totally, absolutely. But from an outbound perspective, really trying to focus and narrow down on, this is the specific thing that I speak on to this specific audience. The other thing I was going to mention is that I think sometimes we feel like by picking a specific lane and picking a specific audience that you speak to and a specific topic and problem that you speak on, that you are limiting your options. But one of the things to remember is that we're not asking you to make like some type of lifelong commitment. So for example, this person who speaks to veterinarians on social media marketing, do they have to speak to only veterinarians, only about social media marketing for the rest of their life? No, absolutely not. But we're picking a starting point just to begin to build some traction, right? So I'll give you another quick example. So you think about someone like some people say, okay, I want to be a speaker like a Gary Vaynerchuk, a Gary V, right? Gary is someone who speaks at all these big entrepreneurial conferences and events, and he kind of does, some type of motivational message. He's like, I want to do that. But remember, that's not where Gary started. Where did Gary start? Gary started in the wine business, and all he did was speak on wine and talk about wine and all things wine, and really just not like other types of beer or alcohol. Just all he did was wine, just very, very specific and focused. Now, once you build some credibility there, then it's a lot easier for him to go, okay, here's what I learned here, and now I'm going to broaden that a little bit. I'm going to take a step out a little bit further. But you can't start by saying, I want to speak to anybody and everybody, right? You have to start really, really narrow, and then you can expand over time from there.
I remember when I came into the kind of speaking world, there felt like there was these kind of two opposing tribes, let's call them. There was the classic kind of keynote speakers, the people who they got paid the fee, they would go and speak. Some would be very good, some not quite as good, but they would go, that was their thing, that was their business. They earned the majority of their money from speaking. Often they would be very, very good at sales. Their marketing was maybe less of a thing. They wouldn't necessarily have big lists, for example. And then there was this other tribe, the kind of the people that came from the online training or the online marketing world, who had like huge. They were very, very skilled at online, very, very good at marketing, but they were primarily using the stage as a way to be able to sell other products and programs and consulting and coaching and other things as well. It felt initially when I came into it, it felt like these were like two opposing tribes, and it seems to be that the lines are blurred a lot more. Now, you're in this world every day. What is your sense of that? Are these two tribes kind of coming together, or is there a new third tribe being created?
That's a good question. No, there's absolutely, I don't necessarily think of, there's that world or this world. I think one of the cool things about speaking is there's no right or wrong way to do it. There's not one that's better or worse than the other. So for example, there are some people, when I was doing a lot of speaking, I'd still do some speaking, but just not near to the level that I was, but I would do 60, 70 events a year. And I know plenty of people who would do, 5, 10 events a year, and some people that do over 100 events a year. And which is better or worse? There's not a better or worse. Really just kind of depends on what the business goals are for you, the business model is that you want to follow. Now, when I was doing a lot of speaking, it was primarily from the initial category that you described in terms of I would go speak. I was a paid keynote speaker. I'd collect a check, and that's kind of the end of the transaction, right? I wasn't really focused on building an online platform or audience or anything like that. It was just really I'd go speak and collect the check, and that's the it. But for other people, they say, hey, I don't. I'll give you an example. There's a guy who went through our training program recently, and he earns over $300,000 from speaking, but what he does is he speaks for free and uses it as lead gen for his coaching business. Now, on paper, you may be like, oh, you speak for free. That doesn't really count. You're not really a true paid speaker or whatever you want to, classify it as. But again, he's using it as lead gen for a multiple six-figure coaching business. And so again, all that to say, is it better to be a paid keynote speaker and to not have any coaching on the back end, or to do a bunch of free speaking engagements that lead to, coaching and consulting, online training programs, books, whatever things that you may want to have on the back? There's no better right or wrong way to do it. Just, again, figuring out what makes the most sense for you. And I think, again, that's kind of one of the cool things about the versatility and the options that speaking does provide.
And I guess it could change over time as well. I know some speakers, they've come from more the keynote type of model of doing it that way, and then they've had kids and families, and they said, listen, I don't want to be on the road quite as much. I want to have more time at home. So they've created some other, whether it's executive coaching or consult or some other thing. And he said, I still go out and speak, but the speaking that I do is a little bit more that client you mentioned just there, where they're going in order to sell, use it as a lead gen for what they're doing as well. But they're still delivering an amazing experience, hopefully for the audiences. But the goal of it is just slightly different because their personal circumstances have changed.
Totally. Absolutely. And again, that's, and some of it may be personal circumstances. Some of it may just be some people like they don't want to travel as much, but they recognize the value of speaking. And so, I know some people who say, hey, I want to speak, but I don't want to speak anywhere that requires me to be gone on the weekend, or anywhere that is more than, a 1 hour drive from my house. That's fine. Yeah. Again, there's no right or wrong way to do it. In the same way that, let's say you're a coach and say, okay, I want to have a coaching business and I only want to work, I don't want to meet with people in person. I only want to meet via Skype or Zoom, and I only want to connect with, people in this demographic. That's totally fine. I think, again, that's like one of the overarching benefits of just entrepreneurship in general, is there is no right or wrong way to do it. Like, you get to make the rules. You get to decide what makes sense for you. And again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, the rules today may mean one thing and they may change down the road. Like I mentioned, I was doing 60, 70 events a year. And for a while that worked. That was totally fine. That was the business model we were following. And then for a little while we've changed, and now the business model looks a little bit different. It's not that one's better or worse. It's just that, what makes the most sense for where you're at in life, personally, professionally, and kind of what, challenges are you looking to add into the business, or best ways to serve people. So again, it's kind of whatever makes sense for you and following that path.
So as you were kind of going on this path and speaking, can you tell us about a time where maybe you were really working on something, you give it your heart and your soul, but for whatever reason it just didn't work out like you'd hoped? And more importantly, what were the lessons that you took from that experience?
Well, one of the unique things about speaking, and this is something that speakers recognize, but we don't always talk about, is that the audience and the environment have a big piece to play in terms of how a talk would go. Okay. And what I mean by that is, most speakers, this is another kind of little side note here, but a lot of speakers, they're not doing a brand new talk every time they speak. They usually have one or two talks that they give, and they give those talks over and over and over, as long as it's a new audience, because they know that material works. That material has been honed in and dialed in and really tested and works really, really well. And so what would happen would be I might go and speak at 3 or 4 events in a week, 3 or 4 different events, different audiences, different environments, different venues, different contexts. And I could tell the exact same talk and give the exact same stories in each one. And it all goes slightly different. And some days it's me that it was just like, man, that I just felt off, or I didn't feel like I really hammered that point home like I wanted to. Sometimes it's the audience, right? So one of the things to consider is, let's say that you go speak at an event and it is a 4-day conference and you are one of the last speakers at the end of 4 days. Like, people are just going to be tired. They're worn out, right? Or let's say that you're going to speak at some internal company and right before you get up to speak, the CEO or president gets up and tells everyone that they're not getting this year's bonus, right? All right, and now here's our speaker, right? The audience is not going to be happy no matter what you talk about, right? So some of it is the audience. Some of it is the environment, right? I'll give you an example. A couple years ago, I did a keynote at an event that had about 2,000 people in it, right? And so give the keynote goes great. And then afterwards, they were going to have me do a workshop in the same room. And so we had a workshop with about 50 people in a room that sat 2,000 people. Wow. Well, that's a horrible environment, right? Yeah. So even though like the content may go well, and I thought I did a good job, the environment is not set up real well for the presentation. So I think it's important to recognize for a speaker, not to like cast blame on an audience or on the environment, but to recognize that there are some things that are outside of your control, some things that you can't do anything about, and sometimes it's you, sometimes it's the audience, sometimes it's the environment, sometimes it's all three. And so recognizing the things that you can and can't control as a speaker. So
I guess as well, when let's say it's an audience, they come in, they've never heard of you, they're this conference, you're the next speaker up. I'm guessing the introduction you get and who gives that introduction to you is going to be pretty critical. That's almost like the pre-frame before you come on. That's kind of setting it up for you in a good way. Is there any advice that you would give around that in terms of, is it best to give like some kind of scripted type of thing, or to have a conversation with them about what they're going to say? Or should you try and maybe have someone that's more senior in the organization, that's maybe more respected in the organization, giving that intro?
Yeah. So what I always recommend is that you give them a script to follow. And I always tell them, don't make it up. Don't wing it. Just here's a script. Just read this line by line by line. All right. And the reason for that is a couple things. One is that when I speak, I use a lot of humor. I use a lot of stories, a lot of jokes. And so when a speaker is coming up, imagine you put yourself in the position of the audience. You're in the audience and a speaker's getting ready to come up and speak. You have no idea. Are they funny? Are they serious? Is this going to be sad? Is this going to be motivational? Is this going to be really hypey? Like, you have no idea what this is going to be like, right? And so the person that's making the introduction, in some ways, they are setting the tone for what it's getting ready to be, right? So let's imagine, for example, you are going to a comedy show, right? You're going to a club or something to watch a comedian. Like, going into it, kind of what the context is. This is going to be funny. You're expecting to laugh. But whenever you go see a speaker, depending on the context, you don't know what the speaker is going to be like or anything that they're going to be talking about or covering. And so one of the things that I do in my own introduction is I will have just a little one-line joke that whoever is doing my introduction, that's kind of the last line that they read before I come up. So it gives the audience, it kind of almost breaks the ice a little bit. Yeah. And it lets the audience laugh a little bit. So as I'm coming on, they're already kind of like laughing at the thing that the whoever read the introduction said, right? So I use it for that context. The other thing that you can do is that I think it's important to have that person share some of your credibility and why you are worth listening to and why you should, why they hired you or brought you in. So if you are, a best-selling author or, different maybe media publications that you've been in, or anything that you have done that is specific to their industry or specific credibility in their world, that's going to mean something that gives some credibility. Because you don't want to, you don't want to be the one that's coming on stage and be like, Well, before I get into my talk, let me take a couple of minutes here and just share with you my resume of why I'm important and why you should listen to me. You don't want to do that, nor should you. So using that, the person that's giving the introduction to read, hey, here's a couple just quick bullet points about this person and something that, this person has, climbed Mount Everest, or this person has a best-selling book, or whatever it may be. Here's some, Fortune 500 companies that they have worked with and some of the work that they have done. Then it helps set some of the credibility so that you don't have to do that when you get on stage. But to do all of that, I recommend that you write it out, that you have it written out, that you give to the person. And so again, it's not something that you're dependent on them to come up with. You really want to control that, what it is that they're going to say.
And what about as you were going through your kind of journey as a speaker, can you tell us about maybe an insight or a light bulb moment in your life as a speaker? You went, oh, okay, this is maybe the direction I want to go with my speaking, or you made some key distinction?
Good question. Okay, well, I'll put it this way. I remember some advice a friend of mine gave me one time. He said, you want to just, and this isn't specific to just speaking, but just in entrepreneurship and life in general. He said, you want to find things where the challenge exceeds the skill set. And so here's what I mean by that. The first time that I got up on stage in front of an audience, first time anybody gets up on stage, you just feel terrified. You feel like the challenge exceeds the skill set, right? You just feel like you're in way over your head. And this isn't true with just speaking. This is, the first time you host a podcast, right? The first time you do an interview, the first time you publish a blog post, right? You just feel like the challenge exceeds the skill set. You have no idea what you're doing, but you like that challenge. What happens over time is the longer you do something, it flips and the skill set exceeds the challenge, right? So what I mean by that is the first time I got on stage, I was terrified, but now I could get on stage in front of a 1,000 or a couple thousand people and do a great job. And even though I could potentially just go on autopilot, right? Because I've done it so much that the challenge or the skill set exceeds the challenge. The first time you host a podcast, right? You just feel like, man, I don't know what I'm doing here. I hope this works. Over time, I can kind of just coast and do it. Not that you would, but you could do that because again, the skill set exceeds the challenge. And so the point being that you want to regularly find things and find, opportunities or just the business in general where it feels like the challenge exceeds the skill set, right? So I had been speaking for a long time, and so I felt like I really enjoy speaking. Speaking is a lot of fun for me, but I felt like that, I got to a point where it wasn't as challenging as it used to be. So I wanted to begin teaching about speaking. That was something a lot of people were asking me about. So we began to pivot our business that direction and create somewhat of an environment where I felt like the challenge exceeded the skill set once again. And I felt like I was a bit over my head in terms of just learning more about, all right, how do people teach this online, whether it's an online course or coaching or consulting or webinars and email marketing and all that goes into that, and putting yourself into a position where the challenge exceeds the skill set. So again, this is related to speaking, but just entrepreneurship in general. It's just regularly finding those things in life and in business where you feel like you're a bit over your head, but in a good way, and it challenges you and engages you even more.
So as we start to round up here, some quick fire questions for you. What kind of are there any kind of online resources or tools or mobile apps that you find really useful for your work as a speaker?
Well, we've got a free training I would encourage people to check out over at freespeakerworkshop.com, freespeakerworkshop.com. If people are looking for more, just training on learning the step-by-step process of how to find and book speaking engagements, definitely check that out, freespeakerworkshop.com. Another question that we get from time to time from people is, how much should I charge as a speaker? And it really depends. There's a lot of variables that go into it. So we actually have a free speaker fee calculator people can use over at myspeakerfee.com, myspeakerfee.com. You just answer a couple questions and it spits out a number of what you should be charging as a speaker. So both of those would be tools that I'd recommend people check out.
What about books? If you to recommend one book on speaking or the art or the business of speaking, what would that book be?
Specifically as it relates to speaking, I'm kind of scanning through my bookshelf right now to see if there's any that jump out at me. One of my favorite business books, it's not necessarily a speaking book, but is a book called Rework from a couple years ago by Jason Fried and David Hansen and the guys that run a company that used to be known as 37 Signals. It's called Basecamp now, but anyway, so they have a really, really good book. They look at business differently, and so that's always one of my favorite entrepreneurship books.
They're the opposite of the VC funded type of organization.
Absolutely.
They take the path less traveled there. And
so.
A final question for you. Let's imagine, Grant, you wake up tomorrow morning, you have to start from scratch. So you have all the tools of your trade, all the knowledge you've acquired over the years, but no one knows you. You know no one. You have to start again. What would you do? How would you restart?
Yeah, I think one of the best things that you can do is, and this is not glamorous, this is not sexy, but manual outreach works really, really effective. And so, for example, from a speaking perspective, I think a lot of times people say, okay, I want to be a speaker, so I'm just going to put up my website and I just sit back and I wait for the phone to ring. And like, that's not effective. I think the way, so for example, if you're going to, if I wanted to start a lawn care business, just putting up a website and sitting back and hoping people magically find me doesn't work. But going out and actually pounding the pavement is one of those things that is not glamorous, it's not sexy, but it works and it's really, really effective. And so what happens is whenever you're starting any type of business endeavor, whether it's a lawn care business or a speaking business, that it's a bit of a momentum business and a bit of a momentum game and just trying to get the ball rolling. And so by beginning just by quote unquote knocking on doors and getting some momentum and getting some traction, you start beginning to get more repeat business, you start getting more referrals. But early on, the things that you got to do is just not wait for people to find you, but go out and find the people that you provide a solution to their problem and let them know what it is that you offer and how you can help them.
Great. Well, Grant, thanks so much for coming on the show today. What is the best way for people, if they want to reach out to you, connect with you? Where should they go?
Yeah, people can find me on Twitter or on our website, thespeakerlab.com. So again, like we mentioned, the podcast, thespeakerlab.com. But yeah, there's a lot of resources there that we're happy to help with people however we can.
Fantastic. And you've got some great guests. I was checking out earlier. You've had Phil M. Jones and Aaron Gargan, and some wonderful guests on that podcast as well. So people should definitely go and check that if you're interested more in the world of speaking. So Grant, I wish you all the best. I'm looking forward to hopefully hearing you speak on stage at some point soon as well. And enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, James. Appreciate you.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.